Hello, friends. I hope you are doing fantastic. So, last week we ended on quickly annotating this. I believe I've got my copy. Nope, not nearby. But we did kind of a scratchy annotation where we just went over, okay, here's some meanings that we see. Here are some various ways that this poem is doing certain things. And when we left, I immediately regretted how we had done that. So I apologize, but we're going to go ahead and you don't need to do anything particular on your sheets. You can just have it the way that it is and watch how I'm doing it here. And then the way that I'm doing it here, you will then do on the mother to son side on your own or with a partner if somebody near you is done and you can work quietly. So you don't have to redo the We Real Cool. You can just watch to see how I would prefer that you annotate it, because this is how we're going to annotate your poem and your song that you should have brought today. If you didn't bring it today, some of the folders will address that. But this is how I'd like you to annotate it. I apologize for the confusion on that. That was completely my fault, and I really appreciate your patience. So here we've got We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks. We talked about kind of the that she has passed away, so some of the terms she's used are going to be a little bit older. So initially here, we've got the pool players, 7 at the golden shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. And so this is her poem, and we talked about a lot of the different meanings it could have. And here I want us to focus on 3 ways to annotate this. So remember, annotate means to write on. So somewhere on your sheet you might make a note, annotate. Oh, you don't need to write this on your sheet. You've already done this. You could, if you wanted to follow along with this, grab a clean copy, but you do not have to. The clean copies I will put up next to the flowers on the podium. But annotate means to write on text. In the context of an annotated bibliography, it would be to write about text. So we're going to go ahead and annotate. And one of the first things that we notice are these all caps words right here. The pool players, 7 at the golden shovel. And we're going to annotate first for literary devices. This is the first way we're going to annotate this poem. So these are the literary devices that you were just quizzed on that we talked about last week. These are terms that should be fresh in our mind. Even if they're not completely memorized, you should be on your way. So this right here strikes me a lot as imagery. Like, it gives like a really distinct picture of imagery. So I took my green pencil and I made a little key up here so that anytime I know that I underline with green, it's going to be imagery. So I'm going to go ahead and underline right here the pool players, 7 at the golden shovel, because I can picture that. And I might even draw a picture similar to how we did last time to remind me of, like, here we've got like a pool table, we've got some people hanging around it, right? 7 people to be exact, right? Like a large group of folks. 4, 5, 6, and then 7. Okay, so we can really see this image. Another thing that I'm noticing here is the pool players, which is like a really cool kind of alliteration. Like, it just sounds neat. That's the one thing about alliteration, is alliteration doesn't have a lot of really deep meaning because it's just words that start with the same letter, but it kind of calls attention to stuff in a way that's just really interesting. So I'm just going to put a line under things that are alliteration because I just want to mark out that first sound. So we've got the pool players, right? So pool players is my alliteration. And then we're moving into the part of the poem that looks much more traditional. So we've got we real cool. Okay, right offhand, since I'm annotating just for literary devices at this moment, I'm like, oh, okay, she doesn't mean like we are physically, like our body temperatures are lowered. She's using an idiom, which is a common phrase that can't be directly translated. She's using an idiom to say that, like, they are respected, they are appreciated by their peers. They've got kind of like an aura of, like, you know, we are doing something right. So that's an idiom. We real cool. And then we've got we left school. We, and already you can kind of notice the alliteration that's happening with the W's. And this is just throughout the whole poem. We. It's like we're French. Ha ha ha. All right. So we've got the we's all the way through. And like I said, like these just give, alliteration tends to give songs and poetry a rhythm, right? Like it pushes on the words in a way that's really interesting. Left school is pretty straightforward. It does tell us something about the meaning. It tells us something about the people who are here. So that's the second way that we're going to annotate today, is for the meaning or the theme of the poem. And we'll kind of alternate back and forth. But we have, we left school. Okay, so on the meaning front, which I'm just going to do in my black pen, well, I'm, like maybe I'm going to write not great students, right? Like they don't seem to value school. It seems like they're leaving school. School is not important to them. And also, like, when we think of the traditional idea of like really cool kids, like kind of like the stereotypical idea of cool kids, I'm going to write cool stereotype. We kind of encounter this idea of like kids who hang out like at a pool bar or don't go to school. So things like that. We've kind of created this image of who she's talking about. 7 at the Golden Shovel. We talked about a little bit last time how the Golden Shovel is probably a location. And so this in our heads should key off that like, oh, that's a reference to a place or a person. It's definitely not a person here, but which is an allusion. Allusion. So here, I'm going to go ahead and underline for allusion. So moving on to the second stanza, we've got we lurk late. Okay, another instance of alliteration. She's really good about using alliteration to her advantage. I will tell you, in most songs, alliteration is used to make it catchier, but here it seems like Gwendolyn Brooks has like a really good handle on like the music of her poetry in a way that I don't think traditional songs that I hear on the radio really do it. We also have strike straight, right? We've got we lurk late, we strike straight. And here we've got kind of a play on words. So first of all, it's a little bit of imagery, which is our green color right here, or whatever color, because you could see a pool player like physically striking the cue ball with their pool stick. Sorry, I lost the word for a second. Or, and we talked about this last time, it could almost be a dual image. It could be somebody like punching. Like if you get in our way, we're gonna hit you, So it might be like a punch. So I'm going to put a little like fist over here. Or it might be like the pool stick hitting the cue ball. Okay? So just to like remind myself, like it's a play on words. She did it on purpose. She's folding meaning into her poems. Because the thing about poems is that traditionally they don't get as much space as like books. So they've only got a certain amount of time to make an impact. And so here we have we sing sin, again with the alliteration. And now we're really moving into some figurative language, because you have to ask yourself, when they say we sing sin, are they actually singing the word sin? No, they're singing songs that have themes that people have told them are sinful. So this right here, singing sin, could be a lot of things. We might call it hyperbole, because she's exaggerating. Like we might call it a metaphor. And I think I'm going to lean towards a metaphor here, but know that literary devices get kind of messy, and you could argue a bunch of different versions of it. So I'm going to use yellow and make it a metaphor in my key over here. And I'm going to say that her singing sin is a metaphor. And I'm going to clarify what I think it's comparing, because metaphors are a comparison of two unlike things not using like or as. So I think she's comparing the songs that they sing about inappropriate topics, like, or whatever, the adults in her life consider inappropriate. I think that there's a lot of debate. To, like, the religious idea of sinning. But you could argue that this is just hyperbole, that she's just exaggerating. You could argue that she is maybe even a little bit of synecdoche, like the part of the whole, right? Sin is the part of the song, and she's now using it as the whole. Like instead of we sing songs that are about inappropriate topics, she says we sing sin. She just like shortens it. There's a lot of room in literary devices to mess around and to interpret different things. Here we have we thin gin. So here, instead of a really specific alliteration, we actually have assonance. So for assonance, I'm going to use a squiggly line. And assonance is repeated vowel sounds. So we, then, gin. And you could be saying, Miss Marchbank, well, the we's also have repeated vowel sounds. You are absolutely correct. Like, assonance and alliteration are going to be the parts of the literary devices that you probably find the most. That and imagery. Like, they are just everywhere. Unfortunately, assonance and alliteration are kind of hard to dig deeper on because they're often just used to make it sound cool, but know that they're there. Like here, in our next line, we have we, jazz, June, right? And you can tell she's doing this really purposefully, right? It's like it's a specific pattern. And so we talked about last time, jazz could be like an idiom for like we bothered June, right? Like there's a person named June that we bother. We also might think about the relative like relationship of school to this, right? In June, school is out. So maybe it's like jazz is like a good thing. Like we are looking forward to June. And even that it'd still be an idiom because it's like a saying versus something that is like could be easily translated if somebody was learning the language. And then we have we die soon. And this is what we call a tone change. And it's interesting that her tone change happens like in the middle of another stanza. So here I'm going to put some brackets around it and I'm going to put an arrow and indicate tone change because her attitude as the author is changing drastically. Like no longer is it like, hey, we're cool cats. We've got our bomber jackets and we're, making grease lightning the car and we vape in the bathroom. It's now like very ominous, like we die soon. And one of the ways we talked about that being interpreted last week was it could be like, okay, number one, it could be a warning, right? Like these are all of the actions that lead up to this. This could be like a cause and effect sort of relationship. Or it could be like a claim of immortality. Claim of immortality. Like we might die young, but that's okay. That is okay. I don't know if you've ever joked with your friends or like said to somebody like I would prefer to die young. Maybe that's the acknowledgement she's making is that like we are not worried about death right now. Like we are just here to have a good time. This becomes really important because this tone change really matters as to what you think the theme of this poem is. I'm going to interpret this poem as a warning. Like I really feel like we die soon. Like that just doesn't seem like something that I think that kids who are like hanging out, like, like skipping school and going to a bar called the Golden Shovel and like lurking late at night and hitting people. Like I don't see them saying, like, hey, we're going to die soon. So I think this is a warning. So I'm going to argue that because this tone change is a warning, I'm going to say the theme of this poem is, and here I'll just write it with an arrow. The theme of this poem is, let's say behaviors, let's do actions have consequences. I was going to say behaviors have consequences, but I think actions have consequences is a more universal theme. Remember, your theme needs to be a universal theme. Your theme should not be like Gwendolyn Brooks explains that actions have consequences because you can't apply that to anywhere else. There are lots of poetry, poems, and songs about actions having consequences, but there is only one about Gwendolyn Brooks explaining that actions have consequences. So your theme needs to be a lesson that's pretty vague, like a pretty overarching, think of like an umbrella. Like this covers a lot of text, but is also specific to this text. So I'm going to argue that the theme is that actions have consequences. Now, the part where we're going to get into, which ends up in you writing a paper about the poem that you choose, is the third way that we're going to annotate this, and that is to find evidence to prove your theme. And that's really critical. Evidence to prove your theme. That's really important. We've pointed out all these literary devices. Inevitably, some of them are going to be evidence, and some of our evidence might not exactly be a literary device, but it's really critical that we take the evidence to prove the theme, which is one of the reasons why people sometimes, I think, are like making fun of English and they'll be like, oh, you could argue that any poem means anything. Like you could, but you're going to struggle if you don't have evidence that proves that. So here, actions have consequences. I'm going to definitely say that here. Maybe I need a highlighter real quick. Excuse me for just a second while I go grab one. Okay, so you might say, I'm going to go ahead and highlight my evidence just for the sake of visibility, but you could like star next to the lines, whatever you want to do when you're doing this on your own. So evidence is going to be highlighted in green. So the evidence from this poem that shows that actions have consequences, I definitely need to highlight "we die soon" because that's like that's the consequence part, right? And so the actions might be like left school, lurk late, strike straight, sing sin, thin gin. Those are the parts that are like really iconic for, you know, actions. Like these are the actions that have consequences. Like these are what leads to that. I'm not going to highlight Jazz June because I don't totally understand what that means. And I'm not going to highlight We Real Cool because, I mean, maybe like here, maybe I'll half highlight it, right? Like a non-committal highlight because it could be part of the actions that have the consequences. So far we've annotated for literary devices, meaning and theme, and evidence that proves the theme. You'll notice that we learned like 20 literary device terms and there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. You will have different ones that come up. One strategy that I would recommend is to take out your notes and to look and be like, okay, the first thing in my notes is simile. All right, are there any similes? And then comb through what you got. Okay, now alliteration. Is there any alliteration? I so bet there is. Alliteration is everywhere. Okay, idioms. Are there any idioms? But comb through your poem. I promise you've got imagery out the wahoo. Like there's a lot. There's a lot. I'm actually going to go ahead. The next step for you in the next folder is to do this on your own with Langston Hughes' Mother to Son. And I'm going to go ahead and get you started right here. And I'm just going to start with a reminder that you are annotating for 3 things. That's first, you're going to look at literary devices. Second, you're going to think about the meaning and the theme. And then third, you're going to think about evidence to support your theme, which is probably going to connect to number 1. It probably will, to support your theme. So let's read this out loud. Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I've been a climbing on and reaching ladders and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps, 'cause you finds it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey. I still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So one thing that I immediately notice is that she is comparing her life has not been a crystal staircase, right? Life has not been a crystal staircase, and that's a metaphor. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make yellow my metaphor this time. And you should be doing this along with me because you haven't worked on this yet. Is a metaphor. And then, right, life for me, it's almost the opposite of a metaphor. It's like she's comparing it to what her life hasn't been, but it's definitely a metaphor, right? Crystal staircase makes me think of like definitely like a very fancy home, right? And she's talking about the steps she's had to take through her life. Like think about like going up staircases is already, you know, probably like fairly physically exerting, especially if you're doing it for your whole life. But these ones are crystal, so it should be kind of nice. So she's saying it's not that. She says it has tacks in it, right? Her life has tacks in it. That's another metaphor. And splinters, we're extending the metaphor. Ooh, do we remember that term? And boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, right? Okay, we've just noticed that this is an extended metaphor. This is not just one instance of metaphor. It's not, my life ain't been no crystal stair, and then we jump down, but all the time, right? It's definitely extended. And there's actually more throughout this. I'm just trying to get you started here. I also noticed that it says no crystal stair. It doesn't say staircase. It says stair, which is a part of a whole. So I'm going to leave you right here, either by yourself or with a partner. You're pulling this apart. You're looking first for literary devices, then for meaning and theme, and then for evidence to support your theme. But what is stair if it's a part that represents a whole? What is that? What color are you going to put it here for the key? And are there any more in here? Let me know if you have any questions by raising your hand.